Right now, the crypto ecosystem is undergoing a period of great change. The powerful and mighty are falling to their knees before our eyes. It's not economic turmoil or market forces this time. It's the hand of the regulator reshaping the crypto landscape. Unfortunately, this game may only be about avoiding extinction. Ready? Let's go. Today, we're going to discuss the regulatory attack on the largest exchange in all of crypto, including what that might mean for crypto and specifically for Cardano. If you're sad for this guy who looks suspiciously like a certain exchange founder because he's in the regulatory crosshairs, but you're also happy for him because the AI only gave him 10 fingers, or if you're finding value in these videos each weekday, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. Well, this is definitely not the kind of tweet you want to see if you're any kind of company in crypto. And this is exactly what CZ and everybody at Binance were treated to today. This tweet from the CFTC. Today, the CFTC charged Binance and its founder, CZ, with willful evasion of federal law and operating an illegal digit asset derivatives exchange. We're about to jump into the charges against Binance and CZ's response, but before we do that, let's look at just a few things to sort of set the context. Here's an article from today from Reuters, and it points out some interesting stats. Binance is by far the world's biggest cryptocurrency exchange. Last year, it processed crypto trades worth about $65 billion a day. Let me repeat that, $65 billion a day, dominating the crypto trading landscape with more than half of the market. Obviously, those numbers were meant to be a reflection of volume from last year. But even if you look at Binance's own numbers over here at CMC, currently during this bear market, we see they're doing 24-hour trading volume of over 11 billion. That's right now in this bear market. They're doing over $11 billion in trading per day. So truly gigantic exchange. And this chart also tells us the story of what's happened recently to the crypto landscape. So in the top three spots, we've got Kraken, Coinbase, and Binance, sort of the crown jewels of at least North American centralized exchanges. These are the biggest, most well-known centralized exchanges, at least in North America. And the regulators have already hit all three. As of today, they've hit all three of the big centralized exchanges. Kraken famously had to settle with the SEC for $30 million. Coinbase recently received a Wells notice, which basically means the SEC is about to file an enforcement action against them. And Binance had an enforcement action filed against them today by the CFTC. So whoever's planning Operation Choke Point 2.0, they definitely hit the first three big entities that they would need to hit in order to diminish our fiat on ramps. Kraken, I think, was it as of the 27th or something like that? I think Kraken's ACH on ramps and off ramps have been turned off. Obviously, we haven't yet seen the enforcement action that will come against Coinbase, and Binance today got an enforcement action that was probably not like the one that would have been filed against Kraken if they hadn't settled. This is not, having read this one, this is not a Kraken kind of situation. This is something else entirely. This is not a $30 million kind of deal. This is something much, 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 much bigger. If we look at these rankings, we can see that Binance is also more than just an exchange. In the fourth spot, we've also got the BNB coin, which is related to the Binance exchange. And it's the fourth biggest crypto project in the entire world. Interestingly, if we look at this chart, it's we've got Cardano here in spot number 7. And then in between Cardano and Ethereum and Bitcoin, you have only a couple of projects that are either deep in litigation with federal regulators or about to be, or stable coins, which are always sort of on the regulatory radar. You've got XRP, famously stuck in litigation for years with the SEC. You've got USDC and Tether could run into regulatory trouble at any moment. And you've got Binance now in litigation with the CFTC. If you take these projects off the table, if these are swept off the table by these regulatory problems, all of a sudden Cardano goes from being in 7th spot to being in 3rd spot. On top of that, everybody knows that Binance is also the biggest multi-pool operator in all of Cardano. Look at this. They're the very largest pool stake group with 62 pools, which means they're killing our Nakamoto coefficient and our minimum attack vector. Yes, Binance are the worst offenders. They're doing more damage than anybody to Cardano's decentralization in terms of validation. I've said many times in the past that there are actually a lot of things I like about CZ, and I would never wish these kinds of regulatory ills upon him. But I still think it's worth pointing out the reality of this staking situation and also the role of Binance as a project in the top 10. So what have we got here? Here's the actual complaint where the CFTC is suing CZ and a bunch of entities, which kind of take in everything across the .com and the .us, and also Samuel Lim, who is the chief compliance officer, or at least he was, of Binance. So what are they accused of? We've got 7 counts here, and no surprise, they all have to do with the Commodity Exchange Act and certain regulations. Count 1, execution of futures transactions on an unregistered board of trade. You won't be surprised that Binance is not a registered board of trade. It's not a registered anything, it turns out. Count 2, illegal off-exchange commodity options. Count 3, failure to register as a futures commission merchant. Like I said, they're not registered as anything. They're just crypto guys out floating around. Failure to register as a designated contract market or swap execution facility. I should point out they might be registered, in some way with some state or something, somewhere, but they're not registered with the CFTC as anything apparently. Count 5, failure to diligently supervise. Count 6, failure to implement customer information program and failure to implement know your customer and anti-money laundering procedures. That's KYC AML, which we've talked about many times on this channel. Count 7, anti-evasion. I know what you're thinking. Anti-evasion sounds like a weird name for a violation, but of course what they're actually referring to is the entering into of agreements, contracts, and transactions and structuring entities to willfully evade or attempt to evade provisions of the Commodities Exchange Act and its regulations. Of course, these first 4 charges are all failure to register with the CFTC broadly. We already knew that. We already knew that Binance wasn't registered with the CFTC in any way because all of the exchanges in crypto would love to register with the CFTC. If the federal government would let them, they would all love to be under the CFTC. Why? Because they don't want to be under the SEC. They would actually even love to be able to register with the SEC, but they can't do that either. Coinbase has famously described all of their many attempts to register with the SEC in some way or even get some guidance from the SEC. They won't let them. The federal government doesn't really have any pathways for any of these exchanges to register with either the CFTC or the SEC. So we know why these 4 first counts are popping up. It's like, hey, you didn't register for us, even though there's not really a way for you to register with us, but we're still going to charge you with that. The last 3, I guess it's the last 4 charges all kind of relate to the KYC, AML, failure to supervise, evasion stuff. And we'll get into that in just a second. But the really interesting thing here to know before we do that is what the CFTC is seeking, what kind of relief they're requesting from the court, what kind of punishment they want for Binance. And this is where it gets really crazy. So first, they sort of lay out all of the different sections of statute and regulation that they think Binance is violating, and then they get to what they're seeking. They say, an order of permanent injunction prohibiting defendants and any other person, so that's all the entities, CZ and Lim, from doing any of those things. The first injunction is they can never do any of these things. Then we get an order of permanent injunction against the same people and entities and their affiliates, officers, agents, employees, successors, assigns, attorneys, and persons in active concert or participation with them. So basically the entire Binance team and then they go ahead and basically say anything having to do with any crypto or digital asset or commodity. Basically, they don't want them trading on or subject to the rules of any registered entity, entering into any transaction involving commodity interests and or digital asset commodities, having any commodity interests and or digital asset commodities. So they can't even have crypto, controlling or directing the trading for or on behalf of any other person or entity involving commodities or digital assets, soliciting, receiving, or accepting any funds from any person for commodities or digital assets, applying for registration or claiming exemption from registration with the commission in any capacity. So it's like, hey, you're in trouble for not registering. Also, we're going to enjoin you from ever registering. Doesn't make any sense, right? Acting as a principal, agent, or any other officer or employee of any person registered, exempt from registration, or required to be registered with the commission. So basically, like, hey, how about you guys never again in your lives get to do anything having to do with any digital asset commodities, which, of course, in their opinion, is going to cover all of crypto. So this is pretty big. This is the entire team. This is not just the defendants. This is the entire team over there at Binance. That's pretty big. An order directing defendants and any third-party transferee and or successors thereof to disgorge all benefits received from trading profits, revenues, salaries, commissions, loans, or fees derived directly or indirectly from acts or practices which constitute violations of the act as described herein. So all of the profits from Binance that have to do with anything described in this complaint. So basically all of the profits of Binance, they have to give up, disgorge. So they have to pay a giant fee that's equivalent to all of their profits and revenues and salaries and commissions and loans or fees. Plus there's pre-judgment and post-judgment interest. So think about this. They're asking a company to go back and pay every dime they've made plus interest. This is a gigantic amount of money when you think about the volume we described for a business like Binance. Next up, we have an order to rescind pursuant to such procedures as the court may order all contracts and agreements entered into between, with, or among defendants and any customer or investor. So anything they've got going on, whether express or implied, with any customers, they have to rescind all that. So pretty much all ongoing business, that's off. This is also crazy for any business. Full restitution by making whole each and every customer or investor whose funds were received or utilized by them in violation of the provisions of the Act, plus interest again. So think about that. Every single customer or investor of Binance, they have to make them whole as to any funds that Binance received. This again could be a gigantic amount. We talked about the volume. And then we have an order for defendants to pay a fine on top of that, civil monetary penalties. How much money are we talking about here? Are we talking about $1 billion, $5 billion? I mean, a lot of people today on social media are guessing this number is going to be in the billions. This is certainly not a case where they could just offer the CFTC 30-something million like Kraken did in their case with the SEC. This is not a $30 million deal. The amounts they're describing in this last section they seem to be amounts in the billions. This is a huge deal, even for a company as gigantic as Binance. So all of those accounts related to CFTC registration sound bad enough already, especially given the relief sought. But then we've got this whole section called its compliance program was just for show. And here they're going to go through the allegations related to those last 4 counts having to do with KYC, AML, lack of supervision, and evasion. So this is where a lot of the really bad sounding allegations reside in this complaint. So if we come down here, it's sort of like one bad thing after another. So remember, Lim was the other individual named in the complaint as a defendant. He was the chief compliance officer formerly. This little section says Lim admitted that .com, meaning Binance.com, doesn't even do AML name screening or sanction screening. So they're saying two different things here. They're not checking to see if they're not even checking people's names to see if they're people who'd be a concern for anti-money laundering or for OFAC type sanctions. They're not even checking the people's names. Then we've got down here the money laundering reporting officer. She made some kind of a statement saying she was upset or lamenting that she needed to write a fake annual money laundering reporting officer report to the Binance board of directors, WTF. Lim, who was aware that Binance did not even have a board of directors, nevertheless reassured her, yeah, it's fine. I can get management to sign. She also said, I has no confidence in our geofencing. Interestingly, down here, we have some kind of a mention of some kind of a message or some kind of information. Looks like they're alleging that was received by Lim that said regarding Hamas transactions. And then they seem to have had some kind of a conversation about whether or not the small sums of money that were going around could even buy an AK-47. Looks like they're alleging Lim made it in a statement like, come on, they are here for crime. And the money laundering reporting officer said, we see the bad, but we close two eyes. These are the really bad kinds of factual allegations that you don't want to see if you're Binance. A Binance employee wrote to Lim and another colleague asking if a customer whose recent transactions were very closely associated with illicit activity and over 5M, I'm guessing 5 million USD, should be offboarded, or if it was in the class of cases where we would want to advise the user that they can make a new account. They allege Lim responded, can let him know to be careful with his flow of funds, especially from darknet like Hydra. He can come back with a new account, but this current one has to go. It's tainted. Then we've got this message. Lim explained. This is all alleged. Lim explained, don't need to be so strict. Offboarding equals bad in CZ's eyes. Then down here, we've got apparently we've got an allegation that Lim said, there is no way in hell I'm signing off as the chief compliance officer for the OFAC stuff. That's great. There's your vote of confidence from the chief compliance officer. Then down here, we have an allegation that Lim chatted to a colleague. U.S. users equal CFTC equals civil case, can pay fine and settle. No KYC equals Bank Secrecy Act, criminal case, have to go to jail. And of course, that is, it looks like his concerns were not too far off, because it looks like factual and other allegations are being made in this complaint that would encompass all of that. U.S. users being involved in their various platforms, along with a lack of KYC. So really bad factual allegations in that complaint from the CFTC. And it's kind of interesting because the CFTC's wheelhouse is really commodities, but obviously they were hinting at a lot of other things there that might be more in the wheelhouse of the DOJ, the Department of Justice. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if we see a follow-on little something from the Department of Justice at some point. We've also got this jurisdictional squabble going on. Like, obviously, I think we all know that while the CFTC sees these cryptocurrencies that are involved as commodities, the SEC sees them as securities. So we could also see another complaint come to Binance from the SEC. So this might not be the end of Binance's problems. And it's kind of an interesting situation for all of crypto, because I think when the complaint first came out, one of the first things people pointed out on social media was that the complaint, if I'm remembering correctly, cites Bitcoin, Litecoin, and Ethereum as commodities. And everybody was kind of like happy about that. But it's easy to forget that the SEC could just as easily come out, file their own complaint, and say that the involved crypto assets are securities, even though that's the one thing they've been sort of not very strongly desiring to do, to tell us exactly what they think are or aren't securities. Gary Gensler will go ahead and tell us that he thinks everything but Bitcoin is a security. But the SEC, for a lot of reasons, including the things that are going on in the XRP suit, apparently doesn't want to tell us what it thinks are securities and what it doesn't. For his part, CZ published this response. He said, "Today, the CFTC filed an unexpected and disappointing civil complaint despite our working cooperatively with the CFTC for over 2 years." So it sounds like Binance didn't know this was coming, and they've been working with the CFTC for over 2 years, which would explain how the CFTC got all of that internal communication, all of the chat logs and everything. Obviously, they've probably been asking Binance for all kinds of information for the last 2 years, and here we are. Now they're using that information against Binance, most likely. He says, upon an initial review, the complaint appears to contain an incomplete recitation of facts, and we do not agree with the characterization of many of the issues alleged in the complaint. So this is quite interesting. You notice he doesn't say this is an inaccurate recitation of facts or we do not agree with the facts alleged. That's not what he says at all. It's much softer. This is not an outright disagreement with what the CFTC is saying. He's not denying. He's not outright denying the facts. He's saying the facts might be incomplete, or we might characterize the issues slightly differently. So this is not a very strong denial whatsoever. And of course, he takes the rest of the response to just sort of talk about how Binance, has a world-class compliance program. They do have licenses and some registration with some kinds of jurisdictions. Basically just spends the rest of it talking about how wonderful Binance is. But you can tell, he probably realizes that this is just the beginning of what will probably end up being, or could end up being, a very long struggle for Binance. We don't know what the future holds. You've got the CFTC and you've got Binance, and they could obviously come to some kind of agreement. It's possible they could come to some kind of settlement. That's something that could happen. But at the same time, when you read the relief that the CFTC is seeking, this doesn't feel like the 30 million settlement like Kraken was able to achieve. This feels like something much, much bigger. And today on social media, a lot of people were speculating that any settlement that approaches what the CFTC is seeking would ruin Binance. It would break Binance because it would be too much money. And complying with the complaint, if they didn't defend it, let's say Binance does nothing, they don't even send attorneys, and the CFTC just gets kind of a default judgment against them, that might also break Binance, because then no bank that wants to be able to touch dollars ever again is going to be able to provide dollar rails for Binance. So unless they achieve some kind of a settlement that's a tiny sliver of what the CFTC says they're after, it looks like this is going to be a pretty serious struggle for Binance. Finally, we also saw this post recently having to do with the capture of Kwon. This post says, Trezor stick found in Terra founder Kwon during thorough body inspection. So notice they're saying not found on Kwon. They're saying it was found in Kwon during a body inspection. Here's the problem with that. Here's a Trezor next to a ledger. That post said that Kwon used a Trezor. I'm just saying, if you're going to be doing what Kwon was doing, you may want to look at the ledger on the left over there. There's an affiliate link below in the description box. If you use that, I make a small commission. So just saying, you may want to consider a ledger. Otherwise, I hope you're having a great week, and and I'll talk to you tomorrow.